And of course, we already have Dr. Gerard E., Chairman, Charity Council. Okay, the panel discussion, building trust through governance and effective resource management. We'll leave you with our moderator for this topic, Mr. Robson Lee. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think what I do is just briefly set a backdrop and context of what we are talking about today. I think today it's about governance, it's about sustainability, it's about the spirit of charity. I think it bears, a lot of, timely reminder that charities are not just merely organizations serving the handicapped or the poor, because certain organizations are organized and structured as charity because they are non-profit. But it doesn't mean that the constituents are people who are, mired in penury or the handicapped. So I think it's important that we need to have a set of rules, an environment, and perhaps a regulator who is mindful that we need to have governance that is institutionalized and not just based on a group of people sharing a certain belief or faith or certain interests. I think that's something that we all need to bear in mind. Dr. E has given us a very good framework for us to begin our first panel this morning. I think briefly what he has talked about is transparency, accountability, and sustainability. And that underpinning these three pillars, I think it's a very fundamental principle of integrity. Integrity that goes with the stewardship. In essence, people who run charities are trustees. They have fiduciary duties. I think this is something that is no different from public listed companies that I think some of you who have experience would be familiar with. I think I'm going to start the ball rolling by having a question. I'll pass this question around, starting with Dr. E. Should there be more rules? Should there be more enforcement by some form of RegCo like we have in Singapore Exchange to ensure that there is some minimum accountability? Because you can't have accountability and responsibility when there's no enforcement. Can I have your views?
I worry about having more regulations and enforcement on charity. There need to be some. The most effective so-called enforcement is the vote by stakeholders. Today, in the practice of transparency, people know what you're doing. Singapore is a small place and you keep bumping into different people and organizations, and they very quickly know whether your organization is doing the right things or not. And they will vote with their feet. They'll walk away and you're going to find you're not going to get the support, you're not going to get the donations. I think that itself will force you to change. So sure, there's a need to have a certain amount of regulation. There's a need to empower, especially our regulator, to go and check if something seems to be amiss. So if you look at our governance, code of governance is not mandatory, it's voluntary. But if you repeatedly seem not to bother about it, obviously the regulator cannot go and inspect everybody, but it's a telltale sign that maybe you are one of the candidates that should be paid a visit to, So I think that is sufficient. The Commissioner has been very open about it, and I fully support that philosophy. So it's up to the charities.
David, your view?
I support what Gerard said, definitely not, I would say. I think, in the charities sector, taking the tone from this conference depends a lot on trust, and your stakeholders will enforce, your own accountability. I think all of you as charities know that, that your stakeholders look to you to deliver the outcomes that that your charity has been set up to. And I would take this opportunity to encourage charities to focus a lot on the substance rather than the form. So we put out regulations, but let's stick with the guidelines of the code. And the code does spell out guidelines. I mean, they're not hard and fast rules, but they are guidelines which, we should try and adhere to or aspire to. Again, looking for substance rather than form. And I think if we have that focus, the need for enforcement action or a strong arm of the law, if you like, would be unnecessary. And I think also not helpful.
Well, we have questions coming in hard and fast, and I'm asking based on the number of votes that each of these questions have secured. One of the most popular question is, what if the board member appointed for a particular purpose doesn't have stewardship? I think what this question is meant to say is that there could be people who's just appointed, but as what Dr. E has said, they're just there for show. They don't really participate in the management. It's just one or two people basically running this whole organization as if that organization belongs to him or her. So what is your take on that, Edna?
I think that is very true in most of the charities here. It's just back to the old boys, old girls network. I think it's key that all charities basically take a viewpoint where you need diversity, and you need a mixture of people from the social sector, public sector, as well as the private sector. That gives that all-round experience that each board member can put on the table, and then together form that cohesive group to bring the charities to the next level. And I think that's what we are facing now. It's difficult, but we have come a long way. I think we are still growing, and I think more and more people from the private sector is actually entering and joining the social sector. I think that's a plus point. I think that is critical in our next step forward.
Well, I think a relevant question that comes off from this question is, certain charities which are organized along religious lines, and the religious leader, because of his moral or his religious authority, he may have a predominant say in the way things are run. And it could come to a point whereby members of the board or the management committee basically toe the line. And this is a spin-off from the earlier question, which I would like to ask Fred. What is your take on that? Should charities, or should the Commissioner of Charities require some form of secular governance in situations like this? Not so much as disrespect for the organization, but because we need to have, for example, a degree of independence, some professional stewardship, as opposed to everyone belonging to a particular faith, and the pastor or the priest or the monk, as the case may be, having supernatural or whatever authority you have. What's your take on that, Fred?
If you look at the charities and the environment and landscape, there are a number of charities, actually most of them have come from some religious background, coming from the fact that what Dr. Yee has said in terms of integrity. So a lot of these charities come with these values that they want to provide a social mission to the community, and as such, it is not about evangelization, it's about trying to support people in the community, whether they are of the similar religion, but just everyone from all walks of life. And just like for us in the Catholic organizations, the mission is really to help everyone, and it's not about how then do we increase our congregation. And in Clarity Singapore, when we look at our services, our mission already states that we are here to serve everyone. And I think that's where transparency as well comes about, because the data that we collect as well, if we are to be transparent, we will show that it is targeted towards everyone and not just towards the religious components of the organization.
Dr. E?
Yeah, I'd like to jump in at this point. I don't think it is an issue as to what type of organization it is, whether it's secular, whether it's religious or whatsoever. The crux of it is the integrity of the individual who said yes to being a board member. Do you have the moral standing, the courage to stand up to what is obviously not right? If you are blessed to have board members with that sort of quality, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a religious organization. I've seen ordinary organizations where board members either lack the spine or are overly kind, tolerate an obnoxious chairperson.
Deferential.
You know, and making excuses for such individuals. I think at the end of the day, the emphasis, someone asked me, oh, we're going to talk about boards again. I say, yeah, we have to keep repeating it because in past years we talk about boards and boards' responsibility. This year I want to emphasize the responsibility of the individual who said yes to being a board member. And once you say yes, you cannot just walk away because you don't like what you see. You have to stand up because it's a reflection of your personal integrity. It's a reflection of your personal value. And I hope every individual is mindful of that and then stand up and do what is right.
Robson, if I may take the opportunity to make a couple of points here. I think those questions are good and they are definitely real. But to give a proper answer, actually, context is very important to those questions. But I think Gerard is right. It's not restricted to religious charities. I mean, you would get the same situation in arts or sports, for example. But I think the point really is secular qualifications is good. All right, but that's not the be-all and end-all of a board member. For me, passion, and belief in the cause is very important. Because we are a charity, and we really want board members who support what we do. So I think that's the first point I would make. And sometimes you have people who are passionate about the cause, but they don't have the background of a lawyer or an accountant, etc., to bring that kind of a secular ability. But the passion, I think, is important. So the second bit is training. I think, if board members lack certain abilities and skills, there are training development programs which we should provide to our board members so that they understand their responsibility, that they develop the basic skills necessary to be effective board members. But that's more easily taught. Passion is much harder to find.
You talk about education, and I just want to draw an analogy. For listed companies, when you have independent directors, for example, the regulator requires a declaration to be made whether that particular independent director has the requisite experience, know-how, training in managing the affairs of the listed company. Now, I think charities being public institutions, I think that it should run on the same principle. Should there be an avenue or a requirement whereby it's compulsory for people who want to be appointed as stewards of a charity to undergo and to obtain and to declare that he or she has gone through certain programs or training so that at the very least we know that there is a certain standard or familiarity with the code or best practices. What's your take on that, Edna?
Okay.
Before all, jump in.
I think it's dangerous to compare and use listed companies as an example and say, should we emulate it? They're driven by different motivation. Whether you're an independent director or not, and when you join a listed company, it's for the fees. Let's face it.
Which is not very much in Singapore.
May not be a lot, but it is really driven by that. And charities is driven by different motivation whatsoever. So I shy away from using that as a model to do it. I think it comes back to the personal, individual conscience and own moral standing. And I hope the reverse happens, that this is then carried as a model to the listed companies, that at the end of the day, it comes back to the individual's moral standing. It's not the regulations. I mean, in America and European countries, there's been a series of failures, and including in Australia recently for financial sector. I've spoken to some of these people, and I had a job offer 3 years ago, and after the third interview, I turned it down because the director who flew in from America told me, when I talk about Sarbanes-Oxley and its failure and you still have the scandal, she said, Gerard, actually, in these cases, it wasn't illegal. And so because they didn't break the law, they never considered was it moral or not. And in charity, I certainly hope a lot of our conscience, a lot of our judgment is based on morality itself. And don't get rationalize and say, this doesn't quite break the law, so it's okay. But you must ask yourself, is it the right thing to do or not?
I think adding on to Gerard's point, I think what is also important apart from passion, morality, is I think a lot of board members, we go up and take on the role because it's nice, I'm a board member, right? Or it's a stepping stone to going on a listed board. But I think what a lot of us don't have is basically the experience volunteering. I think we all just go in, like for myself, I've never volunteered a day until I joined the sector. I mean, that is ridiculous, right? But a lot of people do that. And we don't understand, like for example, if I sit on a board, I need to understand the beneficiaries. How am I going to help them, not just at the strategic level, but be able to see and understand what the beneficiaries actually go through. And I think that is lacking right now. And I think it's important that all board members go for training as in understand the social sector, the landscape, and actually do volunteering for a period of time before they actually go on the board. I think that is not done enough, right now.
Yeah. In fact, there's a relevant question here, which is a follow-up, and that is, how do you attract and recruit good members, good board members, i.e., is this something that we can institutionalize, renewal, I think succession planning. I think it's very important because, and that is to ensure that there is continuity and sustainability, a theme that was brought up by Dr. Yee. So I think perhaps I can toss that question to Fred.
Okay, I believe that being an ED of an organization, of course, I get to see the board in terms of how it develops, who comes in. And I think as an ED in any organization, it is very important in terms of being able to inculcate into the board the nature of the work that we do as a charity. And because as an ED, you are the primary person to be able to to deliver the kind of work that the board can understand, so that they can then go and look for someone who can come onto the board with the right kind of passion, with the right kind of understanding, with the right kind of drive. And I guess in this way, it becomes very pertinent for the board to really understand the charity's work. And I think that's where trying to find someone to come in becomes a challenge, because if the board members don't really know the work of the charity, then it's very convenient to go and bring in someone whom they think can bring in the funds, who can come in with a different dimension, but they don't really understand the work of the charity, and they may come in with the wrong kind of directions.
Then how do you attract diversity? Because I think the danger here is that you tend to perpetuate and attract mini-me's, So how do you, encourage or foster diversity? And these people may disagree with certain ways or bring to the table different skill sets, different backgrounds. David, what do you think?
I wanted to talk about diversity, and I'm glad you brought it up, because we talk about good board members, but we shouldn't have a cookie-cutter solution where everybody comes in with the same kind of background or training.
I think we should avoid that.
Yeah, so diversity is important, and it doesn't mean that if you don't have the right skills that you don't qualify. But succession planning at the board level, I think, is really crucial to the sustainability of any charity. And it's one of the most difficult things for for a charity's board to sort of embrace emotionally. I'd like to say that the chairman has the greatest responsibility in this respect, you know, to try and identify people. But I think it belongs to all board members. So each board should think about its own succession and the appropriate mix of persons' background, skills, involvement, age, gender, whatever it is, to ensure that a charity moves forward, keeps up with the times, relevant to the needs of its beneficiaries.
Good. I think that's a very popular question that has attracted 43 votes. Technology. Sorry.
I think for boards who are nervous about bringing in people to achieve diversity, there is people of not like-minded people, think in terms of 2/3 and 1/3. So when you have rotation, you must have the confidence if 1/3 of your board members are from non-traditional sources, because there are 2/3 of you who are there to keep things stable. And it's always good to hear the views of, or refreshing views of this other 1/3. And that shouldn't alarm you or shouldn't cause you to lose sleep over it.
Now, I was mentioning about a very popular question, and that's a follow-up to what David had said about keeping up with the times, technology. And I think this is a theme that was brought up, a topic that was brought up by Minister earlier. Technology improves governance, but it's not cheap to embark on this journey. So how can charities sustain this, and how do you manage the costs? I think with technology, it comes with also greater responsibility. PDPA, hacking, and all that, which I think later I understand that someone's going to do a demo. So what's your take on that, Edna?
I think for every charity is costs, right? And as much as all of us want technology to help us, we first of all charities go towards grants, right? I think there are IT grants that's available right now, but I guess more importantly is the mindset, whether we believe and truly believe that IT actually helps all of us. I think that's the key, and with hacking and such like going on, how safe is it, especially with donor information and all that? I think that is something, again, back to training. And the ability for all charities to understand truly what are the benefits that it can bring.
Right.
I think apart from the security aspect of it, look at IT like any automation. More importantly is get your processes right. And then when you use IT is to enhance your capability or to reduce some of this repetitive work and so forth. Because when you do it with understanding, you don't need to have the latest technology. You don't need to spend so much money. In fact, you can convince some of the big brands to say, hey, you got a new model out, your discontinued model, can you let us have it for much lower cost? The important thing is if you understand your needs, then you can match the right level of technology to execute it and to keep your costs manageable.
A question that has come up is, in the way it's phrased is that should there be some form of external appraisal? I think perhaps to paraphrase the question is, because I think fundamental to the key pillar of transparency or accountability is the need for internal controls and risk management. Now, should there be a compulsory requirement for internal and external audit so that at the end of the day, bad things are not discovered too late, and then you have all the loss of trust and confidence because something bad has happened, something major, and then everybody's just hogging the papers and reading about what's next, what's going to happen, this person's going to be prosecuted for criminal breach of trust, how long he's going to be sentenced. So, is there a need for some form of compulsory internal and external audit? What's your take?
Just like we talk about IT, right? I mean, if you buy a device, you have a USB port, you have your HDMI port. I guess in the charities, if we have standards, And the standards is something that we all can agree upon as something that will project the right kind of confidence, transparency to our donors, then I think it's necessary.
I believe for all charities, actually, an external audit is a statutory requirement. So that's there, and the code certainly calls for internal audit or some kind of review. Certainly for the larger charities. Okay, so that's already spelt out. I think the wider question is whether or not you want some kind of a peer appraisal or an external appraisal of what you're doing, and that's always useful. I would say that's always useful. But I've not come across any instance of charities doing that, I guess because of the costs. But I do feel that if you have an effective board, as new directors come in, they should have an opportunity to bring a new pair of eyes and have a look at what you're doing, whether it's the processes, whether it's the kind of offerings that you have, the services that you provide. And I think the board can be an effective check and balance. It's not, in a sense, strictly external in form of an appraisal, but it can be independent.
Yeah, I think it's a practice that should be encouraged. I was chancellor of one of the universities here in Singapore, and every year we get a panel of professors from a mix of universities from overseas to come in to look at our processes and what we do and to critique it, because that's how we improve. And I was also with hospitals where every year we get accreditation, a validation sort of exercise that goes in there. And it's always good to have an external source that comes in, because you're too close to it. Very often, being so close to it, you cannot see your own faults. And what you really is, you want to have someone comes in to tell you, hey, you can actually improve in the following areas. And that makes you stronger. And therefore, that ensures your sustainability and helps you to secure your future as well.
Well, the question that has come up is this. I think Dr. E has correctly identified that in most cases, when you feel that there's something wrong, there's something not right about the organization, you just quit. And nobody really queries, nobody really inquires. It's just buried and forgotten. So is there some form of requirement for the charity to notify the commissioner or MCCY the reasons for this person leaving, let's say before his or her term is up, and have some form of declaration? And is there a need for an institutionalized way of whistleblowing, that there's something wrong, and not have a whistleblower then inundated with lawsuit threats and all that kind of stuff? That should there be some form of channel for whether is it a staff member or a board member to whistleblow, and then have some due process to come in, some special audit? What is your take on that? Perhaps I can pass the question to David. What do you think?
I think the channels are open to anyone who does want to whistleblow. I think COC's office is quite happy to take these comments. But I think whichever charity you belong to, there are administrators, and those avenues are open. It's always difficult to distinguish between constructive feedback, whistleblowing out of a sense of grievance and sort of revenge. So this has to be very carefully managed, I would say.
I think, again, come back to my favorite topic for this year is I wish every individual who is on a board just be very mindful of your personal accountability once you've been appointed as a board member. And I think walking away doesn't help, in the sense that if the organization really gets into trouble, so far past directors have been spared. But technically speaking, they can be called up and say, so you were a director during that period. Did you notice, or you aware that this wrongdoing was being done? And as a director, why did you not do something about it? I think if we have that sort of approach, then directors will stop walking away and do the right thing. So far, I think past directors have been spared from a lot of these scandals, and that has become a trend. The easiest and the nicest way to get out of a sticky situation is just resign and walk off.
So what I'm saying is that should the retiring or the director who intends to resign before the term is up, should he or she make some form of declaration, or there's some returns that need to be filed at the in the annual return or whatever, so that at least there's some public record.
Let's not overdo it. Otherwise, no one is going to be willing to be a director. So.
Like an exit interview.
Well, I would add that this is something which Robson, obviously from his corporate background, this is something that's required at listed companies. But even for the corporate sector with listed companies, people who write these explanations, it's
Boilerplate.
It's boilerplate. I mean, it's pointless. I mean, it's there for show, So there's not a lot of point there.
But I think, Robson, it comes back to the point where, we have regular meetings, the board. It doesn't have to be at that point where the director resigns. So there has to be conversations at each meeting, and constructive ones, so that the directors have an avenue to actually have their viewpoints, and be heard. And we work together as a board to iron all these issues out, rather than go to the end and say, okay, I'm done. I just want to walk away. It shouldn't take that, that should be the last resort. That's what I feel.
One word of advice, and I hope everyone has the courage to do exactly as has been said. Check the draft of your minutes and make sure your reservations, your comments are accurately minuted. Don't allow it to be censored out of the minutes. Otherwise, it's not going to be effective.
Yes, I think that's a very good piece of advice, because if something goes wrong and people look at the minutes, you must be able to say that I had spoken, but I was outvoted, that kind of situation. Now, a question comes in, and that's about setting a mandatory hard or fixed term of office, so that you don't perpetuate yourself, sit there for 20, 30, 40 years. Like now banks have it, 9 years. I think listed companies as well. Well, what's your take on that? That also encourages succession planning. Would anybody like to take that question?
Maybe me. I think it's important. I think I'm very proud to say for New Hope, we actually engaged CMPL to do that training on board renewal, and we went through the exercise, and that is something that all charities should embrace, because that's the only way that we can move forward. And we need to accept the fact that after we sit on a board for a while, we need new blood, we need new ideas, and it's always good to have an advisory board. So we move the older board members upwards and let them sit on an advisory council.
At the House of Lords, is it?
Yeah. Yes, because their advice is still valuable, but let the newcomers come in and bring it forward.
David?
I am a firm believer in succession at the board level, and it's always good to kind of institutionalize this in policy, all right? I think our code encourages 10 years, right? It's not a hard line, and I don't, believe in hard lines. There's no magic in 10, 9, 11, 12. Okay, there's no magic in 10. I think a lot depends on your own charity, the sector you're in, the situation that you are facing. But I think it's important to set these policies, if you like. You could enshrine it in your M&A or your constitution, or just set it as a board policy, which is what I would encourage. It should be within the guidelines, because I think it's good. But you should also be able to spell out in your policy situations or a process by which, if there are extenuating circumstances where someone needs to continue, say, beyond the term limit, so-called, that there's a process by which this is done in a manner that's transparent and accountable. I think, it's not a one-size-fits-all, but it's certainly something which, I encourage charities to observe from a substance point of view.
Fred,
rather
what's
than
your
form.
take on that, Fred?
I think for very small charities, it's going to be a challenge, especially like I see some of the art group. One individual out sheer commitment and passion starts the group. So once this individual leaves, that's the end of it. But don't over worry because they are small, they don't raise a lot of money. And to start with, it's self-fulfilling prophecy because it's so personified in this individual that someday when this individual decides to retire, that's also the end of that organization itself. So it will take care of itself. As it grows into a bigger charity, the medium and larger size, then that's where it becomes very important.
Fred, what's your take on that?
I guess if it's a small charity, as what Dr. Yee said, I mean, it's first of all harder to find, a renewal of the board. So in any instance, I guess there's a need to actually grow the organization to be something bigger, so that its mission becomes something that is, I guess, more impactful in terms of outcome. Then you get board members to come in who have the right kind of passion. So in small charities, we would see the founders basically being the core. All right, and I think it's really up to, as what we've said earlier, in terms of the chairman and the founding members to decide where they want to go to as well. And the decision there really revolves around how they want to see the next 5-10 years in the organization.
Well, a question that has come up, and that is the issue of risk management. Now, how does the COC or the Charities Council promote or enforce issues like risk management, internal controls? How do you regulate interested person transactions or conflicts of interest? Now, is this something that should be left just to the charity, or should there be an external body that monitors this as well?
That's a very wide question. You covered a lot of areas, They're not entirely related. But I guess, it's right now.
I'm asking from the questions
Sure,
that are tossed here.
So I don't know the context of the question, but I mean, right now it's kind of self-regulated, that you have to make a declaration on the governance evaluation checklist, according to the size of your charity, if you like, and the appropriateness. The risk management, I think, is very important. It applies in particular for the larger charities. I think in the smaller charities instance, I think the risk awareness is very important, but the guidelines don't necessarily apply. But if I may take this opportunity to plug the importance of risk management. I think as our charities grow larger and more complex, so our larger charities are no longer sort of single focus. They may be multi-centered, multi-agencies. It's actually very difficult for a board member to know what is going on at all the different centers, that are spread around our island, etc. And you do need some kind of a risk management system to keep the board informed of what are the significant risks which the charity is either undertaking, facing, or its situation gives rise to these risks. So the risk management function becomes extremely important as the charity grows.
Well, I think related to the issue of sustainability is the need for change and continuity. What's your take on that? Can I just go around the panel, starting with Edna? Ladies first.
I think change is always difficult, I think, for everyone. And that's where the resistance come in, But change is critical if you want to get better, and that will lead to sustainability. I think it just moves on to sustainability, and we all need that in this sector to grow. Yeah, referring to board the board renewal.
The entire charity, of course, starting from the board.
Yeah, so I think, personally, I would say a 10-year term right now, the 10-year period, it's to me, a bit too long, because that is a guideline, but I guess it's still let's say on average 2 terms, two-year term, that still gets 5 terms in. Whether or not that is a bit too long, that is the discussion, I think, for each charity.
The jury is still out. Fred, what's your take?
Sustainability to me needs to be an underlying value in any charity. Not just so in terms of just the board being there to try and grow the organization, but I think as a charity you have to be sustainable because you need to be answerable not just to your beneficiaries but to your staff as well, because people come in with the right kind of passion and they're there to make a difference. And if the organization cannot be sustainable, that passion is going to die off with the organization as well over time.
Well said. David?
I'd like to make a couple of points. I think sustainability is really, really important for our charities sector. And I'm really proud that there are a number of Singapore charities that have embraced this. I was recently, I'm not particularly plugging them, and I'm sorry I got no involvement, but I was at an AWWA event recently, and they started out as women's welfare, but really they've expanded way beyond that, and they do such good work in the community now. So it's being exposed and changing, not just in terms of technology, etc., but to the needs of community as it grows. And a conference like this is really good because we get to exchange ideas. So for example, myself, I just learned from Minister, which I think is really good. Broadband is now essential, right? Broadband is now essential. I mean, which charity would think, you go to your board, we're going to help the poor and needy with broadband. But, think about it, it's electricity, communications, right? Now that's all essential, right? These things are very important. And I think we're getting to that stage, but it challenges us to think about how society changes and how our charities should respond.
Right. I'm sorry, we are running out of time. I'll have Dr. E to sum up in perhaps in a few seconds or 20 seconds, whatever.
No, I think I'll just add on to the last comment about change. There's one more perspective about change, is remaining relevant. And this is where a lot of us don't revisit our mission and vision and see whether it's relevant. So being the last speaker, I was a bit nervous that David may have used the one example I love to quote. I know some may feel a bit shy sitting in front. I love to use this example. SATA, Singapore Anti-Tuberculosis Association. They have to change, because if the Singaporeans support SATA, you say TB. Of course, recently it resurfaced again. But now they've gone into primary healthcare and everything, and they have remained relevant because of a relook at the mission and the vision, and they reinvented themselves. So many charities will have to think along those lines and see, are they remaining relevant to the needs of today's society?
All right. I think with that, we shall end this panel discussion. Thank you very much, panelists.
Thank you very much indeed, Robson Lee and panelists. It is our pleasure now to invite Mr. David Gerald, founder, president, and CEO of SIS or SIAS, to hand in the token of appreciations to our panelists. And also perhaps go for that photo opportunity. We'd like to thank very much indeed Mr. Robson Lee, firstly. Panelists, please remain on stage for the token presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Fred. Okay. And we'd like to present our next token to Dr. Gerard E. Thank you, Dr. Gerard E., Chairman, Charity Council. Mr. David Wong, Member, Charity Council, sitting right in the center there. Very good points raised. A lot of discussion topics. Also, Mr. Fred Cordero, Executive Director, Clarity Singapore. Thank you for your time and your insights. And last but not least, Ms. Edna Leong, Treasurer, New Hope Community Services, coming right in. There we go. Also, we'd like to welcome panelists and together with our moderator, together with everybody on stage for a photo opportunity now. Yes. You know, there were a lot of questions. I think we had to cut it short, but if you have more questions to ask, I believe panelists will still be around during the tea break or coffee break and lunch. You can pose these questions on a personal level. We're quite sure the panelists will be very happy to address them.